Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to, Mike, in starting, I want to again thank the man who was slated to do this, for allowing me to do this, to second this bill. I reminded the Prime Minister we are both Anglicans. Today is one of the seven holy days that you're supposed to be at Mass, and there's Mass at 12:30. It's All Saints' Day, for those of you who don't know. And since I'm one of the saints, I better go in. Sorry? Oh, yes, right. She's awesome. Yeah. Right, yeah. So, I want to, I want to acknowledge the chair of the commission who's sitting here, who's joined us this morning, Ms. Charmaine Farrington. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to do this because one of the things that attracted me to public life was the whole doctrine that I learned in law school, the doctrine of fairness. And this is something, fairness is a concept which should be as clear as day. And when I heard about it in law school, I was amazed that this was just sitting right in front of my face and really didn't accept that that should be a fundamental doctrine of the way life operates. And there's a lady who is now a vendor in the LPIA. And I went to buy something in a store the other day, and she said, do you remember me? I said, yeah, I did. She said, do you remember when they were trying to put me out of the airport? And you were the lawyer, and you represented me.
That's what a lot of people were saying.
Yeah, it was, I was in opposition then.
Yeah.
And, but the doctrine was simply this. These people had been working in the airport prior to the airport changing. And as soon as the new people came in, the idea was to oust them and just bring someone else in without regard to people's pre-existing rights. And that was just something which seemed to me fundamentally unfair. And this government is committed to ensuring that that never happens again to any vendor, whether large or small, particularly Bahamian vendors who see the equity that has been built up in this country by our own people. And then when others are able to come and invest and take great advantage of it, the first thing that happens is people want to oust them from participation in that equity. So I'm really happy that the Prime Minister has moved this resolution this morning, this bill this morning, and I support it 10,000%. It's a good bill. What I'm also happy about, Madam Speaker, is that not only does it cover goods, but it also covers services. And you know that my public hobby horse over the last 6 months has been the question of services supplied by the telephone companies and services supplied by the banks. And in my view, the existing regimes have not protected consumers to the extent that they should with regard to the application and delivery of these services. I read yesterday an official from one of the regulators who described the digitalization of financial services as being a train that will not stop. And therefore, we're being given a grace period of 2 years to get used to getting rid of checks. I thought this had been made pellucidly clear that this is a fool's errand, which should be stopped, period. And you have to ask yourself the question of whether or not the legislature is going to have to intervene to stop it. And secondly, with regard to banking, you call on the phone if something happens and you need to get a hold of somebody, and the first thing you get is there's not a Bahamian voice on the other end of the phone. If you are actually trying to get to speak to the bank manager or somebody in the bank, they have to take a message, deliver the message to the person here, and then they will get back to you. And the complaint is 9 times out of 10, you never get the call back. So the question is whether or not there's going to have to be a more strenuous intervention so that consumers have a right, when they are consumers of a bank, to get a Bahamian voice on the phone, or have the right to see a human person to get their issues resolved. That's the way it used to be in the modern era with this unstoppable digitalization. That's not the way it is now. And then there's the question of the costs of services. So I think one country in the Caribbean has already taken steps, I believe it's Belize, to regulate those costs, because it just seems to be out of control. You literally, if you call them for anything, well, the worst example is you have a savings account, you get no interest now, but every month there's $10 or $7 taken out of the account for them keeping your money. That's not the way it used to be. And the question is whether that is a fair practice. And then there's the question of the provision of services in exchange for cash. Everywhere now, or it appears everywhere now, that signs are going up that unless you have a card, you can't pay for a service. And some countries, the UK being one of them, they've actually passed an act which mandates an annual report on the availability of cash to consumers, so that there's never a situation which exists that you can't have access to cash. And that seems to me an important provision, particularly since the regulators, in my view, have allowed so many communities to become unbanked. And there's no access to cash in many of these communities. And for the better part of the year, the government has been talking to the banks and the private sector about a mechanism to resolve this. And you know, I smile to myself every time I talk to these folk about that, because they always complain that services by the government are too slow. But they've been at this now for almost 12 months and can't get it done. And the communities that I know of, I mean, there are many of them, but you've got North Andros, for example, where there's a huge complaint about the inability to get cash. Long Island, another example. So these are services which have to be improved. I was happy to see that the regulator, speaking yesterday to the press, acknowledged that part of the issue is the state of telecommunications in the Bahamas and the power supply. And you know the issues there. But IRCA has been onto the internet providers over and over again. And the complaint from people who are my constituents are, they're busy marketing cell phones, but no investment in the infrastructure which is necessary to support all these services, which are supposed to drive the digitalization this so-called unstoppable train. So we got a lot of work to do there. So I am happy that this step is being taken. And what I also want to do, though, is to urge the citizens of the Bahamas to come to understand the systems which govern us, the laws which govern us, because this is a two-way street. And we can pass all these laws and these mechanisms, but two things to me, it seems, are required. One is there has to be inculcated in the regulators themselves a belief that people need to be helped. You can appoint people to all these commissions and all the rest of it, but if their view is, if the people who are peopling these commissions and bodies that we pass, if they do not believe that people need to be helped, then the law doesn't do what it's supposed to do. But secondly, the people themselves have an obligation to understand what the laws are and how they work. I say this because I'm sure this affects every person who's a member of parliament or a minister of the government. There's a view in the country that everything can be resolved by simply calling the minister, and whatever the rule is, you can shortcut it and just do it. And when you ask the question, when somebody approaches you, you say, well, did you file a complaint? No, I didn't. Or, I didn't get a taxi plate, and I want a taxi plate. Did you apply for it? No, I didn't. I didn't. So you say to them, well, how are the mechanisms of government to work if you don't take the first steps to do so? And you say to yourself, you have to exhaust or try to exhaust the systems which are available, because the systems are there for the protection of everybody. Because when the minister gets in trouble because you pressure him or her to go shortcut the system, and the next thing it's in the Tribune and the Guardian, no one's gonna, the person who made the requesting gonna come out and say, no, that person is a good man. They run for the tall grass. Don't see anybody. So it's important for our folk to understand the systems. And the systems have to perform because, of course, one of the reasons I think that is because people have lost confidence in the system and the way it works. And so we who are in the positions of authority have to restore that confidence that the system works. That's the reason why 5 new judges are coming on stream, as they said in the speech from the throne, to make sure that justice moves more quickly so that people don't give up on the system. And you know that when systems get clogged and difficult to operate, you also want to be sure that it does not breed corruption. Because that's the next thing I find fascinating is that people think after some government service, you call them and they say, well, can I offer you something? No, you don't need to offer me nothing. That's a government service, you're entitled to it, you get it. That's what it is. And so that culture is something that we have to fight. So the way this law operates, Madam Speaker, is a complaint has to be filed. And you have to outline what the case is. And then when you outline the case, the commission has to decide whether the complaint is worthy of investigation. Is it frivolous or vexatious? Is there some other way to deal with it? For example, there may be another regulator who's able to deal with the complaint more effectively. Even if it's before the courts, is there a remedy under the Constitution? But the law says that notwithstanding all of those things, the commission still has the jurisdiction to hear and investigate the complaint. It has a power to summon people and to ask people to come in and to give testimony as a part of their investigations. So it's being given powers to be able to enforce rights of consumers in the Bahamas. And as our Prime Minister has just said, this is a first step and a necessary step to what is ultimately the protection of the small man. And the small man or woman it is our duty and responsibility as a government to be sure that we stand in the gap for those who cannot or may not be able to defend themselves. And we must remember it every day that that's the reason. The same reason that that vendor today can say, do you remember me? And do you remember how I got here and how I'm able to still have my business? And every day, that's the battle we fight. And we should never get desensitized to it, to know that that is our mission here. The founders of the Progressive Liberal Party bequeathed that to us as our mission. So this is the reason we formed the organization, which is going to be 70 years this year on the 23rd of November. And no matter what wind blows, we have never as an organization forgotten that. And that's why this legislation is before us here today, and why I'm proud to have helped to move it forward, to make the case, as I've said, on those two things about the financial services, to support this, which is for the protection of those who cannot protect themselves or defend themselves. I thank you for allowing me to make this intervention. I support the resolution, I second it, and I look forward to the execution of this bill going forward as it protects the rights of consumers. And I say again, I hope this gets us across the line in 2026. Thank you.